Hello everybody and welcome to Amphlett Reviews, back with another Hong Kong content review for you guys. I know it's been a little bit of time. Thank you for everyone who's been enjoying the Kenji Fukuoka Japanese run. I will be back on that very soon because there is some new releases and there's definitely a lot more movies to check out from that really extraordinary director and to see more of his filmography. I do want to dive into some Korean cinema. I definitely want to dive into some kind of French New Wave. There's definitely going to be some kind of mini spells on the channel that I want to talk about directors or films that I may or may not have seen and kind of discuss them on the channel. Not every film I watch is going to be reviewed, but the ones that I do want to talk about are the ones that I think are definitely worth a discussion and I think would be really fun for the channel. So now that we are back in Hong Kong cinema, I thought to myself, which is the best direction to go to? I did two previous Shaw Brothers films during Christmas time from the Shaw Brothers Volume 3 box set, and they went down quite well. People really enjoyed those videos, which I really appreciate. One was the sword, one was the magic blade, and I thought, let's continue on that trend of Shaw Brothers, but let's dive into some of the collection, which ones I haven't got around to watching yet, which ones have been on the back burner for quite some time. As already seen from the video description and the thumbnail and the films behind me, is the Flying Guillotine series, specifically the trilogy that's been released by 88 Films. And before I get onto the actual review itself for the first entry, I feel to talk about a little bit about the Flying Guillotine and the two editions of the Flying Guillotine that are available on home media. So in terms of the Flying Guillotine, I have seen this kind of device, this really kind of extraordinary, bonkers, crazy, device, which has been used in quite a few Hong Kong movies, including Burning Paradise, Heroic Trio. Of course, I have seen the Masters of the Flying Guillotine with Jim Yu. Didn't like the film, but I like the cool Flying Guillotine weapon-based action. And I think it's such a ludicrous weapon, goofy as fuck, but really dope and really cool. This idea of basically a spinning kind of boomerang, essentially, that has blades around the edge of it, drops a basket, and by pulling a lever, it locks onto your neck in terms of additional blades, and then you yank and it rips your head off. Visually, it's cool, it's violent, it's exploitation, and it's just a really bonkers idea. I don't know if this is actually based on an actual true life weapon from that time era or made up for the films, I don't know. I know there's an episode of Mythbusters, which I will be checking out at some point, that does talk about that and talk about the films and talk about, can this actually weapon, can it actually work, can it actually be a real thing? And there's been many movies that have used this device and weapons through various kind of villains and henchmen, outside the films I've already mentioned as well. And they did do quite a few movies around this, including the initial trilogy of the Flying Guillotine, which I will be discussing on the channel. Now, in terms of the editions for the Flying Guillotine, we have, of course, the original 88 film edition, which is came out quite some time ago. This is spine number 10, so this is shows how old it is. And we have the booklet there. And this is a very bare bones edition, just a 1080p transfer. That is it, nothing else, essentially. Very bare bones. But despite the film not having a new transfer or anything, I don't know how old this edition is, essentially. It looks pretty good. It holds up really well, and I thought it was a solid transfer for what the film is for that time, and I don't know if it would warrant another version, essentially. It does warrant some more extras, which, funny enough, is on the Shout Factory edition. And this is the Shaw Brothers Volume 2 set from Shout Factory, which is the edition I've had for quite some time. Features stacked full of films on there. The transfers both exactly the same. I saw no differences whatsoever. There's no indication that Shout Factory have gone back and do a new scan or anything. Exactly the same transfers, 1080p, both with the English language and the Mandarin language with the English subtitles. So no worries in terms of better transfers or better subtitles or anything. Exactly the same. However, what the 88th film failed to do during its initial release, and obviously this is the hype of the popularity of these films with Shaw Brothers, they have done some brand new extras for this, and this features quite a few in terms of brand new audio commentaries. There's quite a few on here, also including two new extras with one of the main actors from the film, which talks about his experience, called the Flying Without Wings kind of extras, talking about the memoirs of working with the studio, first time ever appearing on camera doing an interview to his career, and that was really insightful and really fun, talking about his days of Shaw Brothers and him leaving eventually. And also there was a brand new extra talking about the dubbing art of the Flying Guillotine for its US release, which reflects on the early Kung Fu movies of the time during that boom. So this basically features the guys that would take the kind of Hong Kong movies, add new footage in, do sound mixing, add dubs kind of thing, and add sound effects, and basically alter the film, make essentially a brand new film for the US audience. That was just a popular thing on VHS and during its time, because, you know, options weren't a thing then. Essentially, we're sport for choice now. So I think in terms of the extras point of view, it was loaded full of extras, and I think there's definitely is a good step up from the 88 film edition. Whether there'll be another version down the line, I don't know. I don't think there would be. But yeah, what are your thoughts and opinions on the 88 film versus the Shout Factory? Please comment down below. We'd love to know your thoughts and opinions, guys. The Flying Guillotine was released in 1975, directed by Meng Hua. Hopefully I said the name correctly, I do apologise. I've only seen one movie by this director previously, which was the Black Magic, which I did a video for quite some time ago, which I really did not like. You know, I don't think my opinion's going to change on that. I just didn't think it was particularly a satisfying movie. It had cool ideas, but didn't really kind of play it in the correct direction that I would have very liked it to. But not so much of that director. He's done a stack full of films, according to his IMDb page, and including the third entry, The Vengeful Beauty, which is an unofficial sequel to The Flying Guillotine, where the second film was directed by someone else. I think he might have co-directed it, if I'm not mistaken, but I believe he did the first one and The Vengeful Beauty, and also did Dragon Missile as well. So definitely a director that got around in the Shaw Brothers library during the time. And this film stars our main protagonist, Chang Kwan Tai, which is the main actor for this film. Also stars in one of my favourite Shaw Brothers films ever, which I've said this quite a few times now, The Killer Constable, which is very appropriate me talking about that, which I'll get into in a minute. Now, just like the film itself, I'm going to keep this relatively quite simple and kind of digest it and kind of my trail of thoughts as I go along. The film itself, The Flying Guillotine, I think is a really solid film ultimately. I think it's a very simple film in terms of how it executes all of its ideas. I do think it gets a little bit sluggish at times. However, I think it's a very enjoyable watch, and I would revisit this again, definitely for sure, maybe part of a trilogy or just by itself. I think it does a really good job ultimately. However, there is some room for improvement, and maybe this was the first kind of iteration of this idea of the Flying Guillotine, this concept, and obviously they're going through the kind of how they're going to film it, how they're going to make it exciting, how do we keep this engagement kind of going on. I think the storyline for the film is very, very simple also. I think it captures the core of the story within the first 30 minutes of the film. It's an hour and 45 minutes, and the first 30 to 35 minutes are practically summed up the entire concept of the film, and the rest of it is just essentially going through the motions. It follows the Emperor, who basically wants his own private hit squad, a bunch of assassins, soldiers turned assassins, and he basically wants to get this really revolutionary idea. He wants something kind of bold and kind of drastic, and he wants to be able to kill officers or people in his kind of party and people he doesn't like, essentially, that's going to get in his way. He's very arrogant, very pompous, and very demanding, and, you know, he's willing to kind of execute anyone on the spot, essentially, but he knows he can't do that because of the you know, essentially the crowd of the people, the town folks kind of thing. He's known to be this very kind of unlikable, very untrustworthy kind of ruler, and people are getting sick and tired of it, and he basically wants a certain officer to be killed secretly, and he needs a way of doing it that isn't going to blow back on him. They kind of form together about, I think, about 12 to 16, if I'm saying correctly, of soldiers, you know, really kind of top-notch in their field, basically get them in a secret program and train them for months and months on the Flying Guillotine. I want them to be basically the Emperor's private hit squad, a bunch of assassins, and the first kind of half an hour is the trials and errors of that, doing the training, doing the errors, and you know, the Emperor's watching very keenly to see who the star players are and who's, you know, capturing it well in terms of the tactics. And I really like that first kind of 30 minutes. I think the training is really good. I think the characters are nice and light and fluffy. I think you get to know them just well enough. There's some traits that I like in there, some obvious bad guys that you get to see in terms of their angry facial expressions and oh, they don't like the fact that guys get doing better than me kind of thing. And there's some temptation and some gold and women and all sorts of happening in that first portion of the film. It gets to a point where the squad is basically ready to start doing assignments and taking out various kind of officials in the town through these very nasty means of the Flying Guillotine weapon, which is untraceable. There's no open combat. There's no one to kind of point fingers to. These are nasty assassins. These are nasty kind of assassinations during at night, and, you know, no one can point the finger to anyone, essentially. And it gets to a point where our main protagonist, it basically starts to question his kind of morals. He's questioning his kind of, you know, conviction and saying, I didn't sign up for this. I signed up to be a loyal soldier to the Emperor, but I did not sign up to be an assassin. And anyone that gets in that way essentially is getting killed. Even the soldiers and the kind of the crewmates within that kind of group even their head is up for basically the chop and block, essentially. Anyone that dares question the Emperor, his method, his ways, he doesn't obey orders, they get killed, essentially. And that basically draws our main character to kind of leave and escape. And surprisingly, he doesn't want to retaliate. He just wants to live. He wants to get out where he can. He does defend himself. He doesn't want to go against his comrades, but they are far past the point of kind of reason, essentially, at this point. Mainly to the fact also that the Emperor is holding all these kind of soldiers' families hostage, put them in prison. Anyone fails to kind of capture main protagonist, all their families are going to get killed, essentially, and everyone is expendable. Everyone's a hostage. No one is safe. But there is great reward, there is great success for anyone that can make an example of him or can be number one, essentially. You either get with the program or you're going to get dead and your family will die alongside it. It's a pretty ruthless, to say the least. The Emperor is very much a nasty character, which surprisingly does have a limited amount of screen time. He's not the main character or main villain of the film. Surprisingly, he is one that pulling on the strings. He's the one in the background, but he's not the kind of the final third act villain, which is surprising. Now, the reason I mentioned the significance of kind of Killer Constable, because this film reminds me of two films. Like, one is Killer Constable, mainly for the political angle and some of the similar kind of beats in terms of the story, in terms of a constable, someone who is infamous to basically kind of not asking questions, killing in ruthless kind of manner with his massive kind of blade. And throughout the journey of that film, he starts to realize things are not what they say they'd be, and the people that I'm working for, the government that I'm working for, the people in charge are using me as basically a punching bag, as a scapegoat, and he starts to kind of retaliate and go against them. And that journey and that kind of characters he goes through and the people he's responsible for along that journey, it starts to kind of stack up, and it's an amazing film, a really excellent, brilliant film, which is really well delivered. Another film this one reminds me of is The One-Armed Swordsman, and that's some obvious kind of early shove of those kind of, gimmicks, but also some of the same kind of traits. This idea of kind of a lone character, someone who has got a special talent. One-Armed Swordsman, of course, is this kind of his signature blade. Of course, in that film, he goes off to basically, live, in the middle of the forest with a woman, basically, and start a family, and basically become a farmer. This idea of kind of duty, honor, respect, which was used down to very, very much nothing, become a fugitive, and having to take a few matters into his own hands, but ultimately leaving that kind of life behind, start a family, become a farmer, and to kind of get his hands dirty. Essentially, the same thing happens in this film as well, very similar kind of idea, where our main character has a secret cool badass weapon, the flying guillotine. He's number one student, and he comes across a woman who kind of helps each other during a kind of the middle ground of the film, and he basically runs off with her and basically doesn't want the gold, doesn't want the skill sets, and just wants to live. And he basically runs off and starts a family with her and becomes a farmer, wants to earn his living. And the troops of this kind of Emperor kind of hit squad, essentially, after years, surprisingly, the film kind of fast tracks a little bit, is still trying to find him, still trying to get him, again, to make an example of him, and because he knows too much, essentially. And that's what the two parallels of those two movies do. I do think Killer Constable and One-Armed Swordsman are better movies in their own right. I think the Flying Guillotine is a good middle ground between the two, but doesn't quite have enough conviction or strength either side to kind of pull one off. It has a really strong introduction with that first half an hour. I think it captures the entire film really well. I think the last hour of the film, hour and 15, is just kind of going through the motions. It's good, not to say the least. I think the characters are just about right, but you're not fully invested. You like them enough that you care. You understand who the bad guys are. And the action of the flying guillotine is pretty badass. It's pretty cool. And I even like the attempt to kind of create a counter kind of flying guillotine weapon with the umbrella, which I think is really cool during the kind of the third act of the film. I think all the action moments are great. I think some of the side characters are pretty interesting as well, so in terms of the villains. However, it does drag a little bit. It does get a little bit samey. I think it doesn't know really what to do within this last kind of, middle ground going into the third act. It kind of has an idea. It wants to have these kind of mini showdowns, and it wants all these, basically this hit squad to get killed one by one, essentially, but it doesn't really have a lot to say. It has a lot of ideas within its first initial concept, but it doesn't really go for them or doesn't go the extra step compared to the other two movies do in their own respective field. Not to say it's bad. I think it's a pretty solid film overall. I enjoyed it and I would revisit it. but I think there could have been a little bit more. And against the Emperor, I think that was teased and kind of hinted at in places. I think, you know, the main character could have built up to go against the Emperor himself. Overall, the Flying Guillotine, the original 1975, the first entry in this kind of series of movies that kind of spawn on, whether it's official sequels or spin-offs or rip-offs, essentially. I think it's a really solid film ultimately. I think he has just about enough of everything to kind of make the film work ultimately. Very kind of familiar kind of themes and ideas within better movies, but has a really good gimmick in terms of the Flying Guillotine. It has very recognizable, very devious bad guys. There's a very strong protagonist character and his themes and his journey I really like. The action is pretty solid as well when there is actually some to play at. It is very few and far between towards the kind of the middle act going into the third, but when it is there, it hits pretty good and it's really fun and really entertaining. And I think the various different locations definitely help the film's kind of production value. And I think it's a very enjoyable film ultimately. Would I like to see more? Absolutely. Or I think the sequels deliver on that for sure. Time will tell for sure on that. So what are your thoughts and opinions on the Flying Guillotine? Please comment down below. What are your thoughts on the sequels? Do you think they're better than the first one? Do you think this is definitely an interesting kind of series to go down to? Which do you think is better in terms of the 88 film or Shout Factory edition for the film? Please comment down below. So meantime, guys, I'm for reviews. Signing out.